TexasUprising.com. I wanted to cover the shooting, if you didn't hear about it, that occurred in Cleveland, Texas, not Cleveland, Ohio. And the reason I'm covering it isn't to say whether it's a PSYOP or whether it's a false flag, anything like that. Because what's important to note, and yes, of course, nobody wants anyone to get killed or anything to happen to anyone or any family, but we have no way of knowing if these stories are real or not, other than to look at sometimes the obvious stuff, like the event in Tennessee that I covered with the schools, the school shooting, and a lot of the school shootings, of course, which have so many things in it that make you look at it and realize it's fake. But what's important to note is the narrative that comes out of it. And of course, there's always going to be the AR-15 narrative. But I mentioned in a previous video, I have to continue to show you the repetition and pattern here. Because even if these stories end up being real, what the media does is they start fabricating and adding things to the story so that this narrative starts sitting in your head. And the narrative we're starting to hear is about private property. Why is this important? Because Agenda 2030, the ending of capitalism, the bringing in of the New World Order, is a New World Order where you own nothing. It's a communist order. You will own nothing. Remember the saying for the World Economic Forum, you'll own nothing to be happy? Let me just show you a pattern here between the last three events. We had three events in the last month or so. We had the black teenager who knocked on the door. The man felt threatened, but the media told us that the man shouldn't have felt threatened, of course, because that's the narrative they were fed, right? We had the woman who turned in the driveway. The man shot the woman for no reason. Why? Because he felt threatened on his private property. And now this narrative, I'll show you all three at once, where this guy was shooting an assault rifle in his backyard. I mean, it couldn't sound much bigger. But anyway, he's shooting an assault rifle in his backyard. The family comes over from next door, and of course, the shooter says, and I quote, it's his property, and he'll do whatever he wants on his property. This is about removing guns from homes where people are saying, I have a right to have a gun, and I can do what I want because I have to defend my property, to them saying, not only do you not have a right to have your gun, but you don't have a right to private property anymore, and abolishing both, because Agenda 2030 is about abolishing all of this.
Manhunt continues for the suspect in Texas who killed 5 of his neighbors, including an 8-year-old boy. The nightmare unfolded when they asked him to stop firing a gun so they could go to sleep. Fox correspondent Christina Coleman has the latest.
A manhunt is now underway for the killer. Sheriff's deputies identified the gunman as 38-year-old Francisco Oropeza, a Mexican national. The shooting happened around 11:30 Friday night in Cleveland, Texas, about 45 miles north of Houston. Authorities believe Oropeza has since fled into a heavily wooded area less than 2 miles from the crime scene. However, the suspect's location is unclear at this time.
We consider him armed and dangerous, and we're not going to stop until we actually arrest him and put him into custody. But he is out there, and he's a threat to the community.
The San Jacinto County Sheriff says the deadly shooting happened after neighbors complained about gunfire. Investigators say Oropeza had been drinking and firing off an AR-15 style rifle in his yard Friday night. A neighbor told him a baby was trying to sleep and asked him to stop firing his weapon. Authorities say that's when Oropeza resorted to violence.
He says it's his property. He'll do whatever he pleases on his property. The man went back in the house. Next thing they know, he's walking up the driveway with the rifle in hand.
The sheriff says Oropeza went into the neighbor's house and shot and killed 5 people. They identified the victims as 3 women who range in age from 21 to 31 years old, an 18-year-old, and an 8-year-old boy. 10 people were in the house at the time of the mayhem. 5 of them survived.
He says it's his property. He'll do whatever he pleases on his property.
We also want to tell you this morning about a Kansas City teenager fighting for his life after being shot for knocking on the wrong door. The family of 16-year-old Ralph Yarl says he was trying to pick up his younger brothers when he made a mistake. He mistook one address for another. Someone shot. Police say the person who shot this teen has not been charged, at least not so far.
But there are still so many questions. You knock on the door, they say it wasn't threatening. According to the family and the attorneys, he was just knocking on the doors to pick up his little brothers.
Yeah, based on what we know now, unless it's legal to shoot people, delivery people who are knocking on the door,
Exactly.
how is this okay? I don't know. Police are going to be looking into it.
And we do have to question ourselves, society, when we get to the point where someone ringing a doorbell, somebody who's lost or somebody who's looking for help, can find themselves facing down the barrel of a gun.
And
a child.
It happened to police who went to the wrong address in a different state as well. So Something's going on here.
Now to the deadly shooting of a
Okay.
20-year-old
Yeah,
woman
that
who
word-
was
that
in a
happens a
car
lot.
that drove into the wrong driveway. The assailant is due in court this afternoon, and Ariel Reshef is here with the latest. Good morning, Ariel.
Good morning to you, Robin. This happened in a remote area, and the sheriff says cell service is spotty, making it very hard to navigate. Once Monahan opened fire, striking Gillis in the front passenger seat, her friends had to drive for miles to get reception for help. This morning, shock and disbelief as a community mourns 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis, shot to death after the car she was in with her 3 friends turned into the wrong driveway.
Reported 20-year-old female shot in the neck. They're unsure of their location.
Authorities say Gillis was a passenger in that car Saturday night. The group looking for another friend's house in a rural area 60 miles northeast of Albany, New York, when they mistakenly pulled into 65-year-old Kevin Monahan's driveway.
The car that the victim was in
It doesn't even sound real.
was with another car and a motorcycle, and they were traveling together. They were looking for a house on the same road Mr. Monahan lived in. They went to his house in error.
Police say the friends never got out of the car, but Monahan opened fire from his porch, striking Gillis. The area so remote, they had to drive to a neighboring town 6 miles away to call for help.
They realized a mistake. They had turned around, were heading down the driveway. Obviously no threat if they're driving away.
So that's the consistent pattern here. When I see these stories, I obviously see a pattern of what they're trying to say. They feed these lines in. So that guy feeds, I'm sorry, I thought all the family members were dead, except for a young kid. Oh, but, they immediately got a narrative immediately out in the media that he says, it's my property, I'm on my private property, and I'll do what I want, which means I can shoot a machine gun on my private property because I own this property, right? So they're planting seeds to the youth out there about owning things. That's part of this agenda. And I believe it's the last cog in the wheel here of this New World Order. And it's going to be the hardest one. Removing guns will be just as hard, but removing private property is going to be very hard. So this narrative is going to continue over and over and over. And again, one of the reasons that I got thrown off YouTube and I continue to get suppressed is because I see the narratives in these things. These aren't things that they talk about. Any of these other right-wing people talk about. They always talk about these events. They're like, oh, it's so sad, but we still have a right to own it. The narrative here is about removing private property. And you hear all these guys talk about, oh, it's the liberals or commies and all that. Well, to have a full-on communist New World Order government, you can't own anything. Like I said, the World Economic Forum, you'll own nothing and be happy, even though in reality you'll be miserable. It's the illusion of a utopian society. So all these events, whether they're real or not, I guarantee you now, listen every time there's an event like this where there's a shooting on someone's private property, listen for a narrative about, well, it's my property, I can do what I want. Oh, well, I felt threatened on my property, so I can shoot you, even though, the media will tell us that the person wasn't threatening, right? Oh, the black kid knocked on the door. He didn't try to open it. He knocked on the door, and the old man felt threatened and shot him. And then the media just keeps coming out and saying, why did he feel threatened? Why are these people feeling threatened on their private property? Why do we even have private property anymore? Why do we need private property? Why? We should all be allowed to share. Sharing is caring. And this is how they're brainwashing the youth out there. The next thing they're going to tell people is, and again, this is part of the narrative that you're hearing right here, is to be afraid to go to somebody's house or to walk on their property. Because that person has a right to shoot you. So shouldn't we change the laws about private gun ownership and all this stuff? This is 100% what's happening now. And this is 3 stories within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks that occurred. And you're going to hear more and more and more. And while the story in people's minds, of course, is, oh, this poor family got shot, they want you to think to yourself that that could happen to you. That you could go to pull in the wrong driveway on your street. You could pull into your friend's wrong driveway. You could knock on the wrong door. The UPS man could show up at the wrong door. And if the person feels threatened, they might shoot you. So we need to do something about this new epidemic that's occurring. And this is exactly what they're going to continue to do moving forward. They have to convince people that private property is dangerous. They have to convince people that private homeowners, firstly, need to give up their guns. They don't have a right to defend their property because who can define what being threatened is? The story we hear is the kid knocked. Then I heard another story where, the kid tried to open the door. Either way, did the guy have a right to shoot? I have no idea. All I know is that there is a large narrative out there, and a big part of Communism Agenda 2030 is the removal of private property. Period. period. So they might start on this whole agenda by saying, all right, first we're going to remove guns for private homeowners, or they're going to have to pass red flag laws, which would be people like me and you would be able to own guns because we look at conspiracy theories and all that stuff, and we're paranoid. They'll make this whole deception in the media, which is all that they ever do. And then from there, it starts to go from that into the dangers of private property ownership. Because remember, they're going to try getting people into these smart cities. So the narratives you also heard in the story about the woman pulling in the driveway was how the person was in the middle of nowhere and there was no cell phone reception. Remember? They kept saying, oh, there's no cell phone reception. They pulled in a driveway to the middle of nowhere, something out of a horror movie. They want to herd people into these smart cities. These are the techniques that they're using. These are the techniques they're using to give and steal people's rights. They're riling people up about gun violence, and they're riling people up now about it being your property doesn't mean you can be allowed to do whatever you want on your property. Being your private property doesn't mean that you can shoot me if I come to your door. This is how they're going to convince the youth out there to destroy capitalism, to destroy private equity, and really to destroy the ownership of a house on land. Now, I get it that we never really own the home because we pay taxes on the land. But this will create absolute China 101 chaos because people will literally be showing up at other people's homes, especially in this country where it's already insane. We have these insane trans people who should all be committed and sent to an island in a cage somewhere. We have them all running amok. And the government, of course, is allowing them to run amok. But back to the story here. Again, people will hear the story, they'll be like, oh, it's so bad about the budget. They'll think about that subconsciously about, what if I was out? Or what if my neighbor, right? That's what they want to do. They want to plant those seeds. Then they want not just to start ingraining fear in them, they want to start saying, you know what? People, now all of a sudden we're not hearing about shootings at malls and schools. We're starting to hear about shootings at private homes, which occurs a lot because there's burglaries all the time. They're not going to tell you a story about a burglary and the guy defending his home and saving his home and his family from a burglar who had a knife on him. Of course not, because then people will be like, see, this is the reason we need to own guns. No, they want to tell you that so that they can come and get your guns, but at the same time, talk about you don't own your property. You're not going to own it. And to make the liberals continue to clamor for owning nothing and being happy. Because in a world where we don't own anything, we'll be so happy. Because then they could just come and take it, and we'll give everything to the liberal lunatics, and the trans people can come and live in your home with you and hang out with your kid and teach your kid all about their sick perversions. And if the trans person wants to lock themselves in the bathroom with your kid, they should be allowed to do so, because if you don't let them, you're hateful, you're racist, and you're just a horrible person who should die. That's where we're headed. Sorry for the rant after the fact, but just keep an eye on that narrative about private homeowners bearing arms, being told what to do. Don't tell me what to do on my property. Don't drive into my driveway. Don't knock on my door. It's going to continue, I promise, because part of Agenda 2030, which we all know is happening, we all believe is happening. We have the pandemic, we've got the food shortages, we've got the electric cars. Part of what's happening is to remove private property. They already know that people like us are like, whoa, get into the woods, we'll get away from these people. They don't want you, and they will do whatever they can to make sure they get your guns and they get your property. And you get herded into this mess. And they need to brainwash the masses into wanting this. And at this point, if they can brainwash the masses, which I'm saying every day now, into thinking men can have babies, they'll easily be able to brainwash people into thinking that private property ownership is selfish and dangerous. I thank you guys for being here on the website. I hope you're doing well.